Let's talk about fences. Let's talk about boundaries today. Now, there's a line in the story of Cain and Abel that has been misused by many people for many thousands of years, and you may remember the story. Cain and Abel offered sacrifices to God. These were this Adam and Eve's sons. They offered sacrifices to God. God had explained how to do it. Abel followed God's instructions, and God accepted his sacrifice. Cain, on the other hand, did not follow God's instructions, and so God did not accept his sacrifice, and so he was upset. Cain was upset, and he was jealous of his brother, and so they went out into the field with Abel to do some work, and when he was out in the field with him, he attacked him and killed him. Now, that's the very first murder in human history. Now, after that murder, God did his regular custom of coming to walk with people at night, at the end of the day. And so as God comes out and he's walking along, he's looking for Cain, and he finds Cain, and well, in your notes, Genesis 4. The Lord asked Cain, "Where is your brother? Where is Abel?" Now here's Cain's response. "I don't know. Am I my brother's guardian?" Or you probably know that more by the King James Version. Am I my brother's keeper? Right. Now, the answer to that is yes. I am my brother's keeper. In other words, I am responsible for those around me. But we have taken that one line in Scripture and have extrapolated it out in our culture. We've taken it to mean that I cannot allow anyone to suffer negative consequences based on their choices. And so we're in a continual need to rescue people, but that's not what Scripture says. We are their keepers in our obligation to help them when they cannot help themselves, not when they will not help themselves. See the difference? Big difference, very, very important. God has not called us to enable people around us to escape the consequences of their poor choices. There's an entire book in the Old Testament called Proverbs, and it explains in it over and over again that people in general must be allowed to suffer the consequences of their choices, or they will never learn. But even worse than them not learning is they will pass those bad behaviors onto their children and to their children's children. And when that happens, the entire future of the human race is at risk. Now, understand this. Their willful destruction is on them, not you and me. If they starve to death when there's work that can be done and they won't do it, that's their problem. That's not my problem. I don't have an obligation at that point. And at times, their behavior is going to have negative impact on people they have a moral obligation to. So we need to be really very, very careful about how we respond to the needs around us. But understand this even more importantly. We need to be very careful about why we respond. Now, the book of Jeremiah, I've told you before, Jeremiah, they called him the weeping prophet. If the dude was alive today, he'd be medicated. I'm not kidding. This guy was continually crying and weeping and everything. He looked out, he saw what his country was doing and how it was ignoring God, and it made him so sad, and God called him up and put him on a kind of a mission that he had to tell God's truth to those people. But he gives us a great warning here. Watch this in Proverbs 4:23. He says, "Guard your heart," underline these three words, "above all else." Some of us worry more about our credit rating than we do our heart. Why guard our heart? For it determines the course of your life. Listen, your heart is exceedingly deceptive. I mean, you have a hard time even knowing what your real motivation is. Sometimes when we see someone in need, our response is something that makes us feel good, but it's not something that actually does good in the long term for them. And so when we let our short-term good feelings about ourselves get in the way of helping someone make a good long-term decision, man, that's problematic. What we've done is we've actually confused the two, and we have made their situation even worse, and we think we're alleviating their suffering by helping them, when the reality is we're not. We're extending their suffering. So we have to think this through in order to honor God and actually serve the long-term good of others around us, not the short-term good of our own egos, right? You've got to be careful you don't get sucked into the dysfunction. You need to stay above that, and you need to do what actually is best for them. And sometimes that involves letting them have the consequences, and sometimes that also involves putting up boundaries, setting up barriers, putting up fences that limit their approach to you and that limits the effect they can have on you. So to set up boundaries, there's some things we need to consider, several things. All right, introduction. God's design for relationships balances two elements. Now, what happens is a lot of times we focus in on one element or the other. We don't have the balance. We need to balance these two things. The first thing, A, is grace. We've got to have grace in our relationships. 1 Peter 4, each one should use whatever gift he has received to serve who? Serve others, right? When God gives you gifts, it's not for you, it's for others. He's intending you to be a conduit. Faithfully administering, now watch this, God's grace in its various forms. Now, what is grace and what are the various forms? Well, theologically, we define grace in a lot of different ways. We describe it as God's unmerited favor toward us. We call it God giving us what we need rather than what we want or what we deserve and so on, But grace is basically this reality. God is for you. God has acted on your behalf. He's not against you. In its simplest sense, grace comes in two forms. The first one there, number one, is the vertical form. That's God's grace toward us. It's God sending his love directly to us. It's forgiveness. It's mercy. It's salvation. It comes from his word. It comes from the Bible. It comes from the indwelling of his spirit in us. That's the vertical part of it. But with grace, there's also this, number two, there's a horizontal part to grace. See, when God gives you grace, he intends for you to be the redirector of it, to manage it, to put it out to those around us. So we take the grace God has given us and we use it to help those around us. That's what Peter's talking about. We're managers. We're stewards. We're kind of traffic cops of grace. But our delivering of that grace is not to be confused with actions that make us feel good and that enable bad behavior in those around us. See, relationships that have a lot of grace tend to be pretty good relationships because you can be pretty forgiving. You can be forgiving. And when you're forgiving, that's pretty safe. I mean, you think about it. In a safe relationship, you're open. There's no condemnation. You're open to whatever comes your way when people want to address you, if they want to talk to you. You know that what they have is for your own good. But in an unsafe relationship, there's judgment and there's retaliation, and we pull away from each other and we kind of play this game of hide and seek. But when we're safe, we open ourselves up to what others have to say to us to help us to grow. So that's the first balance part is grace. Now, you've got to balance grace with this next thing, truth. If you're all grace, you are all dysfunction because you are letting people continue to damage other people. You have got to understand grace has got to be balanced with truth, just like truth has to be balanced with grace. Ephesians 4:15. We will speak the truth in love, growing in every way more and more like Christ, who is the head of his body, the church. So what is truth? Well, truth is what really is. I mean, truth is what really is. Truth is the laws of physics. Truth is, the law of gravity. The truth is, you find truth in the Bible. There's truth that a wise person tells you when you go to them and you're saying, look, I got this problem, I need guidance, and they give you godly counsel. That's truth. There's truth in the form of feedback we're able to give each other. You see, the way it balances is this. Grace provides the safety, the security that we need. Truth provides the structure for grace to work. You can't use one without the other. Grace is God saying, I'm for you no matter what. And truth says to keep our relationship secure, we need to give each other some feedback here so we don't ruin our relationship, so we don't become enemies. So we need grace, but we also need the truth. All right, now, let's do some introspection. Number one here. Evidence my life is out of balance. Now, your life can be out of balance because of your bad choices. Anyone ever make a bad choice? Yeah, we all have, okay? So, have you ever had somebody else's bad choice affect your life? Yeah, all right. So let's go through this. Let's look at this. Evidence my life is out of balance, all right? First thing, A, my life is out of control. The Bible talks continually about self-control. It says God's people have self-control. If you're not developing self-control, you're also not growing as a believer. Romans 13:13. Let us behave decently, as in the daytime, not in orgies and drunkenness, not in sexual immorality and debauchery, not in dissension and jealousy. See, when you have those things going on that Scripture calls the works of the flesh, your life is out of balance. You're horribly out of balance. When you've got someone around you that you love who influences your life involved in those things, your life is out of balance because their life is out of balance, and you're not putting up fences. You're not putting up boundaries. Now watch this next thing in Galatians 5. I've rearranged this verse as a checklist for you, all right? So if you got any of these things checked, you got to be careful. Life is out of balance. Now, as we go through this, I'm going to give you a little farther definition of these things. Galatians 5. When you follow the desires of your sinful nature, the results are very clear. Sexual immorality, that's any kind of sexual relationship or sexual activity outside of the covenant of marriage. Impurity, that's a heart that loves something God has forbidden. Lustful pleasures, that's desiring anything that God says is not good for you. Idolatry, that's placing anything before God and His word and His plan for you. Sorcery, that's using psychics. That's calling the old Miss Cleo back in the day, right? That's palm readers. That's people who use tarot cards. That's the horoscope. Occasionally, it's also the Farmer's Almanac. It's just decorated a little better, okay? Hostility, that's angry, active hatred. Quarreling, that's being contentious. That's loving to debate. That's living your life as a yabbit, right? Those of you who don't know what a yabbit is, around here we call them a yabbit. That's somebody who always takes whatever you say and they say, yeah, but that's a yabbit. They're contentious. Right? They always think they're the smartest person in the room, right? Jealousy, that's selfish, active, emotional aggression towards somebody because of their status or their possessions. Outbursts of anger, those are temper tantrums that show up in physical action. Selfish ambition, that's an obsession with getting ahead on your own, not caring how it affects others. Dissension, that's somebody who always has an enemy. Have you ever noticed there are people, when you're around them, they always have to talk something about somebody else? They can't just be around you. They're always trying to undermine somebody else. Division, that's somebody always ready to betray someone for selfish gain. You know what's interesting about that word division? I find this funny. Did you know that in the Midwest, the majority of churches in the Midwest have an address that's on a street called Division Street? Yeah. Isn't that interesting? Yeah, we're at the intersection of love and division. Right there, you know? Yeah. All right. Envy. That's that jealousy that actually wishes somebody ill will. I hope she falls going up the stairs, you know? Yeah, that's how that shows up. All right. Drunkenness. That's any intentional loss of self-control, and it can be to alcohol, it can be to substances, it can also be to your own hormones. All right? Wild parties. Those are those parties where you get around and people just get stupider as the time goes by. I'll tell you what, on this one, if you're at a party and somebody brings out a beer bong, you're there. You're there. When people are doing shots, you're there. All right? And other sins like these, because he knew we were creative and we would perfect some of these and call them something else. Now, why is this so important we understand this? Let's look at the last part. Let me tell you again, as I have before that, underline the whole rest of the sentence. This is so important that you get this. Anyone living that sort of life will what? Not inherit the kingdom of God. God says if he just described your life, you're not part of his kingdom. Oh, well, there's a news flash. Yeah, what do you do with that? Well, you go back, you need to modify your life, right? He saved you to get you out of that stuff, not so that you could continue on in it. Because he says if you continue on in it, that might be possible evidence that you didn't really give him your heart and you're not saved. All right, now, the next one, B. Someone else is controlling me. You know what? Nobody else should ever control you. Galatians 5. It is for freedom that Christ has set us free. Stand firm then, and do not let yourselves be burdened again by the yoke of slavery. Listen, it's hard to be around somebody who's a control freak, isn't it? I mean, it's bad enough we can hardly control ourselves, let alone somebody else. And then you have somebody else come in, and they're asserting that on you. And the way they do it is they insult you by offering to help with the obvious. Think Marie Barone. If you ever watch it, Everybody Loves Raymond, all right? That's her right there, okay? They treat you as if you are too incompetent to survive in their absence, right? Let me give you a couple examples. These are not in your notes, but one of those guys that control you by their anger, because what they do is, hey, daddy ain't happy, ain't nobody going to be happy, right? You make dad mad and you better run, you know? You hear that sliding belt coming off those pants, you better beat feet out of there, okay? Yeah, see, if you don't do what they want, they get mad and they let you hear about it and they bring it up over and over and over and over and over again for years to come because they're mad at you. If you don't do what they want, they find a way to blow up or to escalate or to intimidate you or to punish you. See, part of the reason why they try to focus all their control on you is because everybody else in your life is smart enough to stay away from them. They don't have any other friends, so they're only going to control the people they think love them. Listen, healthy people don't tolerate that behavior from anybody. Anybody. All right, now the other group I was going to mention too is the group that goes by guilt. They like to use guilt. Well, I'd rather go to the Olive Garden, but I'm fine with going to Red Lobster if that's what everybody else wants to do. I suppose I can get a salad there. You're all going, I know who that is, yeah. And they mope around and they go, no, I'll be all right. Don't worry about me. I'll be fine. I'm always fine. It's okay. I'm used to it. Listen, either one of those people are crazy makers. Either one of them. Either one of them. So what's the answer? Well, this is where boundaries come in. What's the purpose of a boundary? The purpose of the boundary is to restore God's balance into the relationship where grace and truth are both there. See, simply put, a boundary is just a very clearly marked property line. It's a property line. It's like a fence, or it's like a privacy fence around your yard, or it's like the fences that run through the woods or whatever. It's just a fence that says, everything within this boundary, within this fence, is mine, and it's my responsibility to maintain it. It's my responsibility to watch over it. And understand this, it's my responsibility to protect it too. And I may have to exclude you at times to protect it because your behavior is unhealthy. Now, some people go, well, isn't that divisive when you're telling somebody they're not wanted? Isn't that mean? Let's go back to Proverbs 4. Guard your what? Your heart. See, your heart is only guarded if there are clear lines drawn and people honor those lines and you make them honor those lines. It limits what you're exposed to. So you need a boundary that guards your heart. Now, there's two aspects of boundaries we're going to look at today, okay? Let's go to number 2. Here we go. How do I restore the balance to my life? All right, through good fences, setting hard boundaries. That means you don't drop these boundaries. When you establish them, you go right there and you stand and you go nose to keep them. But there's a couple things about the boundaries. Well, boundary number 1, I must learn to love others without needing to rescue them. I must learn to love others without needing to rescue them. Man, this is so important because we confuse love and rescue. They're not the same thing. Sometimes rescue is actually an act of hatred. We think it's love, but it's love for you. It's not love for them when you rescue. Galatians chapter 6. Simple verse gives us some balance here. Carry each other's burdens. In other words, care for each other. And in this way, you fulfill the law of Christ. So it's good to care for each other. But here comes the push toward what we now call tough love. Each one should test whose actions? His own actions, without comparing himself to somebody else. For, underline the whole last part of this sentence, each one should carry what? His own load. So you have things you have to deal with. Listen, I can love you and I can care for you, but each one of us has got our stuff that we have to be responsible for. See, we can go through things with people, but we can't go through things for people. We can't go through in their place. You know, I'll tell you what, on more than one occasion, I have sat in court with people I love and care about in order to encourage them, but they still have to deal with the consequences of the choices they've made, right? And what has happened is, what was their action? Their action crossed a boundary line where society said, here's a fence, don't go past this. And because they blew past it and didn't respect the boundary line, now society has to come back and as a consequence, give them a timeout for their failure to obey. And I can't sit there, I can't blame the arresting officer, because I may love that person with all my heart, but I can't sit there and blame the arresting officer or the judge for enforcing clearly established boundary lines that have been agreed upon. That's not helpful to my loved one. My friend has got to learn that lesson to change their behavior by honoring the boundaries. They don't have to like the boundaries, but they have to honor them. They have to stay inside acceptable behavior. I can help a friend who's lost their job, but I can't help them if they decide they're just going to sit home and let everybody else take care of them. My obligation to them has ended. It's their responsibility to take care of themselves. In fact, Paul says at one point, if a guy won't work, he's not supposed to eat. It doesn't say if he can't work. It says if he won't. It's a willful choice. It's their responsibility to work toward taking care of themselves. It's my obligation to help them as they are attempting to help themselves. But if they won't help themselves, I have to set up a boundary. I have to set up a fence because I have to protect my family too. Right? Boundary number 2. I got to learn to confront others in love. In love. Matthew 18, if a brother sins against you, go to him privately and confront him with his fault. If he listens and confesses it, you've won back a brother. So I have to be really careful to approach this carefully and biblically. So we talked about this last week. You got to set up a meeting, right time, right place, right attitude, one that benefits both of you. And I've got to get in there and I've got to say, listen, I love you. I am not trying to beat you up. I'm not trying to judge you. But I want a better relationship than what we have. What I want is I want a better us. I mean, this is about us. I want a better us. And because of that, I've got to tell you some truths because of us. And I suspect you may need to tell me some truths about me because of us. But we can't keep going like this. And see, I'm not acting out of hatred. I'm not acting out of anger. I'm not acting out of revenge. I'm trying to find a way to preserve the relationship. See, my moral boundary isn't because I'm hoping to keep them out of my life. My moral boundary is because I want to be able to include them in my life. And I want them to find a way to fit into my life. I'm just hoping they'll listen. All right? Now, number 3. Here's some skills I need to learn to survive the crazy makers. I'm going to give you 3 skills. They're simple skills, so don't overthink them, but they're not easy. All right? All right, we kind of covered this a little bit. A, I need to always start from a position of love. I'm going to tell them, hey, you know what? I love you. I want what's best for you, and I also want what's best for us. Jesus never once acted out of selfishness. He always acted from love. He never got into verbal arguments. He never screamed at people. He never traded insults. He never made people guess what he was thinking. He was honest. He had grace and truth and balance, and he put it out there. And see, our motivation for this boundary is to offer them the security of our love, but also to protect ourselves from their dysfunction. You realize, sometimes you hear people talk about church discipline. And people associate church discipline with somebody getting kicked out of church. Did you know that's not what church discipline is about? Church discipline is not about kicking people out. It's about encouraging people to come back in and to stay in. It's setting a healthy boundary. It's helping people understand what's acceptable and what's not acceptable. And I'll tell you, the person that you go talk to, they may feel like it's rejection. They feel like it's rejection because they're unhealthy. And so you've got to assure them of your love and assure them that what you're doing is you're giving them an invitation to join you in a healthy relationship. So that's the whole motivation. You start from that position of love. Now, B, I need to say no when it's best to say no. It's interesting to me we have so much trouble with this. See that alphabet down there? Fill in the 2 missing letters. Isn't that interesting? It's the only word that appears naturally in our alphabet, no. But you've learned that when you learn the alphabet, you learn how to spell the word no. But a lot of us live like we've never heard of it. I mean, a lot of us live as if we've never used it, and we invite crazy makers into our lives, and then we get mad at them, and we try to set a boundary, and we flip, and we flop, and we flip, and we flop, and we flip, and we flop, and they don't even know where we are on anything. Listen, what kind of things should you say no to in your fence, in some of those relationships? Shout them out. What should you say no to? Do what? Things that you can't afford to buy. Yeah, don't blow your money. Quit blowing your money and then going, I'm so poor, I'm so poor. Jim wants to know who said that. Okay, it wasn't your mom. You're okay. All right. What else? Sometimes you can compromise your convictions, and that's not good. Sometimes it is okay to compromise something. Well, I'll give you the 3 P's that you probably have to throw out at some point if you got crazy cousins in your life. Call them the 3 P's. When you're around me, no porn, no pot, no profanity. Pretty much lays it down, doesn't it? Yeah, I mean, there's all these things. What we need to do is we need to say yes to their good behaviors. I love it when you act like that. And no to their bad behaviors. You can't come around. I'll tell you what, I do this a lot because somebody will call me because they need to talk. But the problem is it only takes me about 10 seconds to understand that person on the other end of the cell phone is drunk. Or they're high. And that was not Jim. Not recently. And you know what I have to tell them? I actually have it set up in an automatic response on my text if I see their number come in the middle of the night. So I can just text them back with a push of a button. I'll tell them, I would love to talk to you. I would love to talk to you. But you know I'm not going to talk to you when you are drunk or high. Because you'll lie to me. You'll be all over the place. You'll cry and tell me I'm your best friend in the world. Then you'll get mad and you'll take a swing at me. And then you'll be wasting my time. So when you find this message, you'll be sober. Just know you called me last night and we need to talk. Yeah. You know what? And I text that to them, and I let them know. But I tell them, I love you, but I will not participate in your dysfunction. Say, but I can't make them stay out all night. I can't make them sleep in the car. Really? Have you never slept in a car before? They'll be fine. I mean, let's face it. Wouldn't it be better to have them throw up in their car than your house? Yeah. All right. Yeah. So there are some of those things where you've got to actually, you set up the fence, and sometimes you lock the gate. When inside you really, really, really want to let them in. But you know it's not good for them because they're using you. And that's not good for them either. And see, when you continue to put up with this repetitive abuse, whether it's little snarky comments, you know, or it's abuse or it's dysfunction, you are becoming a part of their dysfunction. And rather than helping them with their healing, you are making their life worse because you're resenting them. They're losing maybe the last friend they've got because you're putting up with it. Matthew 5, just say yes and no. When you manipulate words to get your own way, what happens? You go wrong. Listen, when you flip-flop back and forth and you can't keep a yes or a no in place, when you blow an uncertain trumpet in your relationships, you're not actually operating from a position of love. You're manipulating words to get your own good feeling inside. And you may go to bed that night and feel all warm and fuzzy inside, but you have just condemned them to weeks more of whatever it is they're doing. So you can go wrong with that. You can actually make things worse. All right, next thing, C. I need to give or allow consequences when necessary. I don't want them to have to sleep outside. I don't want them to have to go to jail. They don't have the money to go to rehab. I don't want them to get arrested for shoplifting. They'll go to jail. They'll have a record. Listen, you are not helping. There's a lot of people sitting in this room right now where jail was their turnaround point. Jail was not a bad thing. It was not a good thing in that sense, but it wasn't comfortable and it wasn't fun. And they didn't like it at the time. But you know what? It turned around their lives, and some of them, jail saved their souls. See, loan and bail money is generally a bad idea. One of my neighbors, I saw their car getting picked up. And I went out and I said, your car broke? And he said, no, I signed for my cousin down at the jail. I don't know where he is. They came and got my car. Now, how do you think that relationship's going to work? Think they're going to be having fun at the next family reunion? No. No, they won't, right. See, when rules are broken and you ease the punishment, a lot of times that's an encouragement to go ahead and violate another rule because it wasn't that bad. And you become an enabler of their dysfunction. And eventually they're going to lash out at you and they are going to accuse you. They're going to call you mean and evil and hateful and self-righteous and all that stuff. When you finally get healthy and you draw the line in the dirt and you put the fence up. See, their reactions are human nature. This is out of sequence. Hebrews chapter 12. This is actually down about 3 verses there. Hebrews chapter 12, verse 11. We don't enjoy being disciplined, right? It always seems to cause more pain than joy. Right? That's what we think, right? Yet follow what happens now as we learn to practice self-discipline and boundaries. But later on, those who learn from that discipline have peace that comes from doing what is right. So the question you got to deal with is, do you love people enough to risk their rage in the short term in order to help them in the long term? See, that's the position of love. I love you enough and I'm going to let you be angry at me and not speak to me. Because eventually you're going to get it right, and I have hope for that. Watch this, Proverbs 19:19. Let angry people endure the backlash of their own anger. If you try to make it better, what happens? You only make it worse. Here's that same verse from a different translation. A person who has a hot temper will pay for it. If you rescue him, you will have to do it how many times? Over and over and over again. See, sometimes you got to tell your kids, you're not allowed to be around these people anymore. Sometimes you may have to tell other people, you're no longer allowed around my family. Don't come around my family. Don't come in my yard. Leave your porn, leave your profanity, leave your pot, all that stuff, leave it somewhere else. Sometimes you just got to say, don't use that language around me or my family. Don't come around my family when you've had a drink. Don't come around my family when you've been smoking. Don't bring any of that junk with you. If you want me around, there are going to be limits to what we're going to talk about. Here are the behaviors that are not acceptable in my presence. That's what you do. If they violate them, you have to wish them goodbye. All right, let's wrap this up. Conclusion. My hope for a great relationship, balance and boundaries. Balance and boundaries. You got to balance grace and truth. You don't compromise on them. And you set up clearly defined boundaries of what's acceptable and what's not acceptable. You know, you got some people in your family, you may have to say to them, you know what, I love you, but if you ever speak to me that way again, we'll be done. You're not going to be allowed around anybody. You willing to try that? You willing to do that? Watch this last verse, 2 Corinthians 13:11. Dear brothers and sisters, by the way, the church in Corinth was a church full of backbiters, gossips, and all kinds of nasty people. Dear brothers and sisters, I close my letter with these last words. Be joyful. Grow to maturity, encourage each other, live in harmony and peace. Then the God of love and peace will be with you. Then you'll get to have a decent relationship. Let's bow our heads. Father, thank you so much for your kindness to us. And Father, I thank you for your words on this subject that we really don't like. Father, give us the courage to stand for you. Father, help us to realize when we're somebody else's crazy maker. Father, help us to seek to do the right thing when someone comes to us and says, you know what, you're dangerous around my family. You make me nervous when you're around my family. Father, help us to respond with the right attitude toward that. Father, help us to honor the love they have for their family and even the love they're displaying for us by risking our anger, by risking our rage in order to save the relationship. Father, may we live in harmony, may we live in peace, but Father, may we live in real harmony and real peace, not in evasion, escape, and avoidance. Father, may we actively honor you. And it's in your Son's name we pray. Amen.